Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin tonight with a number, just one number, $400 million. That is roughly what a single American biotech company has poured into a project with one goal, and one goal only: to reverse human aging, not to slow it, not to manage it, to reverse it. And they are not the only ones. Across Silicon Valley, across Beijing, across research stations orbiting 250 miles above your head at this very moment, some of the best funded, best educated minds on this planet are quietly working on what used to belong entirely to mythology: the abolition of death. Now, you might be thinking, what does space have to do with this? Stay with me, because in a few minutes that connection is going to click into place. And I promise you, it will unsettle you a little. It certainly unsettled me. Because here is the strange thing nobody tells you. Outer space, it turns out, is one of the best laboratories in the solar system for studying why we age at all. Astronauts who spend 6 months a year aboard the International Space Station experience something doctors call accelerated aging in miniature. Their bones lose density at a rate roughly 10 times faster than an elderly person on Earth. Their muscles atrophy. Their cardiovascular systems change shape. And yet, here is the twist. Something else happens too. In 2019, NASA published the results of an extraordinary experiment. 2 identical twins. One astronaut, Scott Kelly, spent nearly a year in orbit. His brother Mark stayed on Earth as the control. And when they compared the 2 men afterward, researchers found that Scott's telomeres, those little protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes, the ones that shorten every time a cell divides, the ones many scientists believe are a kind of biological clock counting down our years. Scott's telomeres had actually lengthened in space, temporarily. Then, within days of returning to Earth, they snapped back to normal and shortened even faster than before. Now hold that thought. Lengthened telomeres, a biological clock, briefly running backward. Because that single strange data point has launched an entire field of research, funded by billionaires, embraced by governments, and I want to say this carefully, treated by an increasing number of very serious people as the first real scientific foothold on the mountain that humanity has been trying to climb since the Garden of Eden. The mountain called Immortality. I am a mathematician by training. I have spent my career around scientists in laboratories and lecture halls, arguing with atheists and believers alike about what the evidence actually shows us. And I want to tell you tonight, I am not here to mock this research. Some of it is genuinely brilliant. Some of it may extend healthy human life by years, even decades. And that is not a small thing. That is a mercy for people suffering from disease. But I am here because I believe there is an urgent warning buried inside this story. A warning that most of the scientists chasing it will never say out loud in public, because it isn't really a scientific warning at all. It is a very old warning, dressed up in the language of biotechnology and orbital mechanics. And by the end of this talk, I want you to see it as clearly as I do. So let's go back to the beginning, because the story is more remarkable than most people realize. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, gerontologists, scientists who study aging, began to notice something odd. Aging is not, as we once assumed, simply wearing out like an old car. It behaves more like a program, a set of instructions encoded in our biology that seems to actively drive decline. And if aging is a program the logic runs, then perhaps, it can be reprogrammed. In 2012, a Japanese researcher named Shinya Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize for discovering that adult cells could be reset biologically back to something resembling their youthful embryonic state, a discovery so significant that laboratories around the world began asking, could you do this to an entire living organism? Could you take an old mouse and make it young again? In 2016, at the Salk Institute in California, researchers did exactly that. Partial cellular reprogramming, they called it old mice, treated with a cocktail of these Yamanaka factors, showed reversed signs of aging, better organ function, improved wound healing, even in some studies, extended lifespan. And this is where space enters the story properly. Because in 2020, that same laboratory sent astronaut related aging experiments to the International Space Station, testing whether microgravity accelerates the very cellular pathways they were trying to reverse on Earth. Space, you see, is a pressure cooker for aging research. 6 months in orbit can do to a human body what 10 or 20 years might do on Earth: bone loss, immune dysfunction, cardiovascular strain, even changes in gene expression that mirror what we see in elderly patients. Which means, if you want to study aging quickly and reverse it quickly and prove your reversal works, orbit is the fastest classroom in the solar system. Now stay with me, because here is where the story gets bigger still. In 2013, Google, yes, the search engine company, launched a subsidiary with a name almost defiantly blunt, Calico. California Life Company, its stated mission, in the words of its founders, was nothing less than solving death itself. Its chief scientist at the time, Cynthia Kenyon, had already made her name by genetically modifying a tiny worm called C, elegance and extending its lifespan by a factor of 6. 6 times longer life from a single gene modification. When that news broke, people asked her, seriously, whether the same trick might one day work for humans. And she did not laugh it off. In 2022, a separate company, Altos Labs, launched with $3 billion in funding, backed by some of the wealthiest men on Earth, with the explicit, publicly stated aim of reversing human aging through cellular reprogramming, not managing disease, reversing time itself at the biological level. Do you see the shape of this story now? This is not science fiction anymore. This is not a Silicon Valley eccentric's private hobby. This is the single largest, best funded scientific ambition of our generation, and increasingly, its research is happening not just in labs on Earth, but on space stations, and soon. If the plans of certain companies come to pass, in orbiting biotech facilities built specifically because microgravity does things to human cells that gravity does not allow. So here is the question I promised I would bring back to you. If we can do this, if we really can slow or halt or even reverse human aging, should we? Because I want to suggest to you tonight that this question has already been asked before. Long before laboratories, long before space stations, long before telomeres had a name. It was asked in a garden at the very beginning of the story the Bible tells about us. And the answer given there is not the answer our culture wants to hear, but I believe it is far wiser than anything coming out of a modern research grant proposal. And I want to show you why. In the book of Genesis, there is a tree, not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That one gets all the attention. But another tree, standing right beside it, the tree of life. And after humanity's disobedience, when Adam and Eve are removed from the garden, listen to what the text says God does. He places a cherubim and a flaming sword at the entrance to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, I want you to notice something remarkable about that verse, because most people read straight past it. That is not a punishment dressed up as mercy. The text explicitly says it is to prevent humanity in its fallen, broken state from reaching out his hand and taking also from the tree of life and eating and living forever as we are. That is the phrase that should stop you in your tracks. God does not simply hand out immortality like a party favor to any creature clever enough to reach for it. He restricts access to it deliberately because eternal life given to a being in a state of moral and spiritual brokenness is not a gift. It is a curse locked in amber forever. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Imagine every grief you have ever carried, every regret, every wound, every fractured relationship, never healing, never ending, simply continuing indefinitely in an unrepaired state. C.S. Lewis, a man I owe an enormous intellectual debt to, put this with characteristic precision. He said that if there is no God, then this life is all there is, and every human ambition, including the ambition to extend it forever, is simply a partial escape from meaninglessness. But if there is a God, and this is the sharper point, then endless biological life without moral and spiritual restoration is not the answer to death. It is the prolongation of the very problem death was meant to signal. Now here is where I want to draw the two threads of this talk together, because I think this is the heart of the urgent warning. The scientists at Calico, at Altos Labs, on the International Space Station are not wrong that something in us resists death. They are not wrong that the ache for more life, more time, more being is written into us at the deepest level. In fact, and this is something the secular researchers rarely acknowledge, the Bible agrees with them completely on this point. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says that God has set eternity in the human heart. We are, every one of us, hardwired to want to live forever. That longing is not an evolutionary accident to be explained away. And it is not a bug in the code to be edited out. It is evidence. It is a signpost. C.S. Lewis again, in a passage I return to again and again, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. The immortality researchers have correctly diagnosed the disease, the wrongness of death, the horror of decay, the outrage every human heart feels when a child dies too young or a mind is stolen by dementia. Where I believe they have gone catastrophically wrong is in the cure, because their cure treats death purely as an engineering problem. Faulty cells, shortening telomeres, insufficient reprogramming factors. Fix the mechanism, they say, and you fix mortality. But the Christian diagnosis has always said something different, something the ancient world understood better than we sometimes do today. Death is not merely a biological malfunction. The Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Rome, said that the wages of sin is death, meaning death is not simply what happens when your telomeres run out of road. It is the visible symptom of something spiritual, something moral, something relational that has gone wrong between humanity and its maker. And no amount of cellular reprogramming touches that. You can extend the lifespan of a fractured relationship. You cannot heal it by extending it. Let me put this in terms my fellow scientists will understand. Suppose you have a software system and it keeps crashing. And suppose the crash log tells you the corruption is at the level of the operating system itself. Not a single faulty file, not one bad line of code, but the fundamental architecture. Now suppose your solution is simply to keep the system running longer between crashes, faster processors, better cooling, more memory. You have not fixed the corruption. You have simply given it more time to run. That is what I fear is happening in the laboratories orbiting above us tonight. Brilliant people, genuinely brilliant, are building faster processors and better cooling for a system whose deepest problem was never about processing speed at all. And here is the warning I promised you at the very beginning, the one I said would unsettle you, and I think by now you can feel it coming. If a genuine biological path to radically extended life, even quasi-immortality, is achieved, and I want to be honest with you, I think aspects of it may well be achieved, at least partially, within the lifetimes of people in this room. Who gets it first? Ask yourself that question honestly. $3 billion of funding does not distribute its discoveries evenly across the human race. History tells us again and again that revolutionary life, extending technology, follows the same path every transformative technology has ever followed. It begins with the wealthy, the powerful, the well-connected, and it trickles down to everyone else decades later, if at all. Are we prepared as a civilization for a world where the rich do not simply have more money and more comfort, but literally more time, potentially centuries more time, to accumulate power, while everyone else still dies on schedule. That is not science fiction anymore. That is a policy question with a laboratory timeline attached to it. And there is a second, quieter warning, one that I think matters even more, and it is this: what happens to meaning, to urgency, to love itself, in a world without death's deadline? I have officiated at funerals. I have sat with dying friends. And I can tell you something that surprises people every time I say it. Proximity to death is often what makes love, courage, and moral seriousness possible at all. If you knew you had unlimited time, would you have married when you did? Would you have reconciled with your estranged brother last year? Or would you have said, there's no rush, we have forever? The psalmist prayed in Psalm 90, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Notice, he did not pray for more days. He prayed for the wisdom that only comes from knowing the days are numbered. Take away the number, and you may not get a wiser humanity. You may get a humanity that procrastinates its way through eternity, endlessly postponing the very things: repentance, reconciliation, love, sacrifice, that only urgency ever seems to produce in us. So where does this leave us? Am I telling you medical research is wrong, that curing disease is somehow unfaithful, that we should stop trying to heal the sick? Absolutely not. Jesus himself spent a significant portion of his earthly ministry healing the sick. And the Christian church has been at the forefront of medicine, hospital, building, and disease research for 2,000 years. The pursuit of health, the alleviation of suffering, is a deeply Christian impulse, and I celebrate every advance that relieves genuine human pain. But there is a line, and I believe it runs precisely between healing and abolishing, between restoring the body God gave us to function as it was designed and attempting to engineer our way permanently around the consequence of humanity's rebellion against its creator. The first is medicine. The second, I fear, is Babel with a biology degree. Another tower built by human hands reaching toward heaven on humanity's own terms, without reference to the God who actually holds the keys of life and death. And here, finally, is where I want to leave you tonight, because the Christian answer to death was never learn to avoid it through clever engineering. The Christian answer to death is far bolder and far stranger than anything coming out of a biotech laboratory. It is resurrection, not the indefinite prolongation of this current groaning, decaying body. Paul calls it quite bluntly a perishable body, but its transformation into something entirely new. It is sown a natural body, Paul writes to the Corinthians. It is raised a spiritual body, not eternal life squeezed out of telomeres and reprogrammed cells, forever chasing a receding finish line, forever vulnerable to the next accident, the next virus, the next unforeseen failure. But a promised, guaranteed, resurrected life, secured not by a research grant, but by an empty tomb outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, the one piece of historical evidence, I would argue that every immortality researcher on that space station should be reckoning with, and almost none of them are. The tree of life was guarded once with a flaming sword to protect fallen humanity from an unbearable eternity. But at the very end of the Bible story, in the book of Revelation, that tree reappears, not guarded any longer, but standing open, its leaves offered for the healing of the nations, freely available to everyone who has been made ready to receive it. That, I would submit to you, is a truer, older, and infinitely more hopeful science of immortality than anything currently orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour. So my urgent warning to you tonight is simply this: by all means, celebrate every genuine medical advance. Be grateful for longer, healthier lives. But do not mistake the extension of days for the answer to death. Do not let a civilization dazzled by telomeres and space stations quietly forget the older, deeper diagnosis and the older, deeper cure. Because the question was never really, can we live forever? The real question, the one written into every human heart since Eden, is this: forever with whom? And forever as what kind of people? That is the question I will leave ringing in your ears tonight. And I believe it deserves better than a laboratory's answer. I believe it deserves the answer of the empty tomb. Thank you.